Well, it is an absolute delight to be here. And thanks to Sydney, we picked the date really well because what a week. There is a lot to talk about. And this is, as Dean Lee said, a really historic moment for our country and for the world. And a really interesting, like if you're a political junkie like me, it's just a fascinating election and seeing what's happening across the country and all these very different results. So I'm really excited to just have this conversation with you this evening, and we'll turn things over to Sydney. Thank you.
So Ambassador Anderson, what are the most pressing global challenges the U.S. is facing right now? What's happening in the election. So
yeah, I mean, I would name three. And the first is the reason that we're not all together in person and that we're doing this discussion by video, and that is COVID. And I would make it a little wider than that, and I would say COVID and biological threats, because while this is sort of a incredibly complex virus and pandemic that we're dealing with, this is potentially not going to be the only one in your lifetimes or mine. And I would say that the second issue, and these are not in order, I think these are all equal, climate change. And, you know, we can talk about that in greater detail, but you all know this issue well, I'm sure. And then the third, I would say, is nuclear weapons. And so when you think about these three issues, let me add a fourth. I would say cyber challenges and the threat of cyber attacks. We have a lot of other issues that are deeply important, but if you look at these four issues, as we are experiencing now with the COVID pandemic, can change lives of people across the country and across the world. On nuclear weapons, I would say that the issue of nuclear weapons has sort of fallen off the radar of the world. But the threat from the weapons remains. There are still enough weapons in the United States, in Russia, to destroy the planet many, many, many times over. And the fact that our governments are not even talking about these weapons and are not really engaged in the kind of serious conversations and diplomacy that happened during the Cold War is really dangerous. And we can talk about that more. So all of these threats are not ones that any nation can address on their own. All of them require countries working together to figure out solutions. As you know, I mean, we could completely dramatically lower our carbon emissions in the United States, but if we don't get other countries on board, we'll still have the kind of fires, dramatic weather, and climate change that we're seeing now. So I guess that gets to kind of one of my overarching points, which is that we need to restore our country's ability to engage with other countries and do so quickly.
Thank you. So Dean Lee mentioned earlier that we're living history. So what are your thoughts on this election, and how is it different than other elections? Because some of us, this is one of our first that we could vote in. So it's slightly new. It almost seems normal. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, some of my thoughts on the election are inspired by a lot of the travel that I've done around the world and some of the work I've done as a diplomat. I've met with people in other countries who are willing to go to jail and are willing to die in order to be able to cast a vote and have a say in their government. And if you look at the United States, here we have the power to shape our government. But we don't exercise it. And I looked back at presidential races back to 1908 and looked at turnout. And I think the lowest turnout in a presidential year was about 48%. And the highest may be this year. They're still counting. But even that, it's probably going to be around 66% if the estimates are right. But I mean, other than that, I think the highest turnout was somewhere around 65 or 64%. And so, you know, if you hear journalists, they're like, it's the highest turnout ever, huge turnout. But think of that. That means 4 out of every 10 people did not vote. And it's sort of a basic duty, I think, to be part of a society and to have a voice in shaping things, just first of all, to vote. As for this election, it's sort of happening in slow motion, right? And it's kind of carrying out over days as they're counting votes. And I think the amazing thing is that during this pandemic, when it is very complicated to vote, not every state is like Montana, where mail-in voting was already easy and set up and kind of a practice. But that the election has happened. And from everything that we can see, it has gone off well. It's really dramatic. And I actually would love to be hearing from some of you about what it looks like, you know, if this is your first election voting in and actually truly participating in, kind of what is your sense about the state of our democracy today? But from my perspective, there are some really hopeful signs about the state of our democracy, hopeful in people getting engaged in national and global issues and speaking their minds and taking to the streets and expressing their points of view, and also in higher than normal turnout. But it's still, I think we could be doing better. I thought of this before, and I thought of this when I was in the classroom, because I was always amazed in my classes, just kind of the ideas that students would bring for solving really, really complex global problems. And I thought, you know, what if 9 out of 10 students in this country voted? I mean, you would shift elections. You would shift the outcome of elections. So those are my thoughts on the election.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a direct student question. Will the new administration be able to battle against the global issues that we face today? And from your experience, what are some strategies with dealing with these global issues? Because they're very complex, like you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, there is no shortage of things that are just going to be sitting in the inbox of the next president. Just things that come up that you have to deal with. And one of the most important things to do is to prioritize and to think through and think, what are, you know, the top issues that you want to make progress on, that you want to move the needle on. You're going to end up spending, you know, probably 70% of your effort and time, or sometimes 80, or sometimes 85% of your time on things that just happen. For example, addressing COVID, dealing with the challenges that may come, say, from North Korea or Iran. Those are things that are kind of incoming. But what you really need to do in order to actually get something big done is decide to prioritize and think through, okay, I'm going to manage everything that's going on effectively and well. And then I'm also going to try and actually push forward and make progress on some specific issues. I think we've gotten some hints about what a new administration might do if it is Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris. And then we also have a pretty good understanding from the past 4 years of what President Trump might do in dealing with the world. And I think it would be very different approaches. But I think the most important strategy would be pick your priorities, pick the things that matter most. I think you got a hint from me about what I would choose in the answer to my first question. Cyber threats, biological infectious diseases, whether intentionally spread or naturally occurring climate change and nuclear weapons.
So another student question, how has the relationship with foreign countries been affected by the US's response to COVID-19? And what do you think are the most difficult relations for the new administration to reform? They kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So yeah, relationships with foreign countries and those directly affected by the US's responses to COVID.
Yeah, I'll start with the COVID piece. You know, a long time ago, I remember listening to a story on NPR, and it was after there was an earthquake in Iran. And this was at a time when we didn't even talk at any level with Iran. Like when I went into the Iran nuclear talks, it was the first contact that anyone at my level or a little below or above had with the Iranian government. We weren't even talking to them. But after the earthquake, it was such a devastating earthquake, and I think it was in BAM. Aid came pouring in from different countries. And each country would set up like a tent, and they'd have doctors and medical supplies, and they would treat people. So there was an Italian tent with the Italian flag. There was a Russian tent. There was a Chinese tent. There was an American tent with the US flag. The line for the US tent was demonstrably longer. People waited hours to go to the US tent, and they could have gone somewhere else. You know, there were qualified doctors everywhere. And it was because there was the perception that we have the highest quality medical expertise and support. And so people were not just coming with earthquake injuries, they were coming with, and I've had this problem with my eye, or, you know, I'm having, you know, I have diabetes. I mean, they were bringing kind of everyday ailments, not just things related to the earthquake. And the lesson for me from that was that and it was there that I got the idea that, you know, health diplomacy is actually something that is could be of great benefit to the United States, because it's something where we have great expertise and where people in other countries value and respect what we bring to the table. I will give you my personal opinion, which is that when we have a president who says, if we get a vaccine, it's only going to go to Americans, or it's going to go to all Americans first, then it shakes the global system, because the global system is used to the United States leading in a very different way and figuring out and helping to bring countries together to say, how should we be distributing vaccines in a way that's equitable and fair? And so what you saw were countries lining up to get an untested Russian vaccine, because they didn't think that they would be able to get vaccine from anywhere else. So I think it, beyond the issue of COVID, it changed countries' perceptions about the US role in the world and in seeing us as a reliable partner. And if you think about the importance of this issue, because having a vaccine, it's not just sort of like a trade issue, not that trade issues aren't important. It's not just like a, you know, some other kind of discussion about, you know, maybe, well, I won't denigrate other issues, but it's something that it's about the government's ability to keep their citizens alive. So there's probably very few issues that even rise close to that level of importance. And the signal that we send to the rest of the world is that you're on your own. Good luck. So I think that ultimately, when there is a vaccine, I don't think that's the approach we'll end up taking, because it's not in our interest. You know, you could immediately think, God, it'd be great if we just hoarded all the vaccine to people in the United States. How many flights are there that come into the United States from countries around the world? A friend of mine, I'm going to go on a little diversion here. A friend of mine was the public health commissioner for the city of New York. And this was years ago, years and years ago. And there was an outbreak of tuberculosis in India, and she was trying to get the attention of the mayor of New York City. And because she realized that this is something that would spread in New York very quickly, and it was antibiotic resistant. And so she couldn't even get in to see the mayor. And so finally, she just sent him a list of the flights that came in every day from Delhi. And she got the meeting like that, because all of a sudden it was like, oh, yes, something that's happening over there can actually affect us here. So we have an interest in making sure that vaccine is distributed equitably and that it's going to the places that and the people who need it most first. So that was a very long-winded answer, but what was the second part of the question, Sydney? Sorry.
No, of course. What do you feel will be the most difficult relation for the new administration to reform?
Reform. I think that we need to reset our relations with the world writ large. I mean, part of how you think about what kind of relations you want with other countries and what countries you prioritize is you think through, your priority issues that you want to advance. And then you think through, which countries do you need on board working with you toward your objective? And, there's one way to do it, which is say, we're the United States, we're the most powerful country in the world, do it, damn it. And that will only get you so far. That's called using power. There are other ways to do it, which is called, building out your authority and your credibility, which is thinking through what are those countries' priorities? And are there places where their priorities overlap with ours to where we can form partnerships and work together? And I think you'll find that you get a lot more done when you have a diplomatic strategy that is based on that kind of thinking. It's hard to get other countries to focus on your priorities if you don't even give any consideration to the things that matter most to them. Nations, it might be the fact that they are slowly sinking into the ocean. Well, no, they're not sinking. The ocean's rising. Sorry.
So the next question is a little bit of a different direction, but an important one all the same. Could you speak more to what you're doing now? What is Pivotal Ventures? What does your day-to-day look like? Why did you decide to work at Pivotal Ventures after working in high-level government positions? People are very curious. It's an intriguing company.
Yeah. So, I've worked mostly my whole career on foreign policy on global issues. And I got to know this company, and it's actually set up like a company through some consulting work that I did with them. And I was just so intrigued. I love working with people and organizations who have big, ambitious ideas and are trying to change the world for the better. I mean, I've realized that's kind of the link between different jobs I've had, whether it's been inside government or in nonprofits or in my consulting work. Pivotal Ventures is focused on advancing social progress in the United States. Our focus now is mainly on advancing gender equality, gender equity. And one of the things that really has struck me is that even after the Me Too movement, where it felt like there was some real progress and doors opening and things happening, if that pace of change continued, it would take 208 years for women in the United States to gain equality. And that is very compelling to me. And I think that we will have a better society for everyone if we can speed up that timeline by a hell of a lot. We also are doing a lot of work. So when we think basically, so a lot of our work is focused on advancing women's power and influence. And when you think about like how you break that down and what that is, we're working to get more women involved in tech. We are working to develop new models of caregiving, to pass paid family medical leave, to elect more women to public office. And we're also doing a lot of work in adolescent mental health. And so for me, it was an interesting, I got really interested in the issues, and I really liked the people. And I really loved kind of the innovative way this is set up. It's set up as a company. It's not a nonprofit. It's set up as a company so that we can use all tools at our disposal. We do philanthropic giving, but we also do direct investing in companies. And we're setting up venture funds as well. So, for example, if you want to disrupt the caregiving industry, which is pretty insufficient to meet the needs of today, and if you think about it, because of COVID, like caregiving and paid family medical leave are so front of mind for tens of millions of Americans because they're all struggling with this. So we are experimenting in different ways to try and drive this change, and so it's been really fun for me to kind of exercise different muscles and learn about new things, and it's just a different challenge. So that's why I ended up there. It was very compelling for me.
That's so inspiring. Thank you. What were your favorite experiences as ambassador at the United Nations, and what were the most frustrating parts of that role?
My favorite experiences. I mean, why I was really drawn to take the job at the UN, at the U.S. mission to the United Nations was it was the beginning of the Obama administration. And it was a moment in time where, in the wake of the war in Iraq and other things that had changed the U.S. relationship with the rest of the world, I really thought being at the UN would be at sort of kind of the pointy end for us on global issues. And one of the things I just loved about being at the UN is every country sends their best and brightest there. So, sort of you're in a building where the whole world is gathering every day to try and resolve problems peacefully at a conference table. And, when you have trying to get 190 plus countries together to tackle big issues, sometimes that progress can come really slowly. But when it comes, it carries the legitimacy of the United Nations, of countries around the world behind a solution. And so I think one of the things that I really enjoyed was just the interaction with essentially the world. I'd walk into a room, I'd walk into the General Assembly, and it would be, people from everywhere, and just the conversations and the things I'd learned. And then also seeing the incredible effectiveness of some of the UN's work. I mean, the UN is a big bureaucracy, and it can move very slowly, and it's limited by the will of the countries that are part of it. But when there's something going on in the world that everyone is running away from, it's often UN peacekeepers that are going in. It's WHO doctors that go in. And, if we did not have a United Nations, we would need to invent it. But I think we also need to invest more in making it a more effective body for the world. And the US has the power to be very influential in doing that. And we just need to invest in doing it. What didn't I like? Oh, I'll tell you one more story, actually. So my first day as an ambassador, literally, I just sworn in, and I was told, okay, in the Security Council, we're trying to renew the resolution on peacekeepers in Western Sahara. And, it's this very divided issue, et cetera. But it was my first day, and I just okay, I'm going to get this resolution done. And I kept the council in session for 8 hours, 8 or 9 hours. It was ridiculous. People, and I kept shuttling back and forth between the parties. Like, okay, if we move an inch here, if we change a word here, and I wouldn't give up. And so I got it done. And, I'm walking back to the mission. I'm thinking, wow, a more experienced ambassador would have probably gotten that done in a couple hours. Must be my newness. I didn't know the tricks. But I thought, whew, I got it done. I didn't fail my first day. And then months later, I was on the phone with someone at the State Department. And they said, oh, I'm so glad to meet you, Brooke. We never thought that you were going to get that resolution in the Security Council on Western Sahara. We thought that was the year it was just going to go down. And I was like, wait a minute, no one told me that. So, there were the moments where that were frustrating was just when the progress is slow. And that there's some burning issue, something that's really needs direct, quick action. And you can't build the kind of consensus that you need for it. And those can be tough days.
A follow-up question. What do you think was the United Nations' biggest success while you were an ambassador there? Is there one thing that just stands out? You're like, that was amazing? Or are there just many things?
I can't really pick one thing that was like the best, but why don't I just give you a few examples? I think that because the UN exists and because the Security Council exists to work through issues, it can actually take away pressure for conflict. So, for example, when the North Koreans attacked the Cheonan, a South Korean vessel, it went to the Security Council. And through some long, arduous negotiations, there was a Security Council resolution that exacted some penalties on North Korea. And, that sounds kind of, oh, okay, well, that's what should happen. If there hadn't have been that venue and that outlet, I think the South Korea. If you think about having a place that can pass law, basically international laws, the Security Council of Resolution has the force of international law to come up with solutions to really pressing global issues. And by doing so, it's the things that don't happen that sometimes are your success.
Thank you. What steps did you take to end up in these amazing roles? Like when you were our age college students, did you know you were heading for that? Were you like, that's a goal of mine? Or did you just kind of stumble into it along the way? Do you have any tips for anyone who wants to follow in your footsteps?
I did not have the audacity to think that that is where I would end up. Like I just didn't have the imagination that that was within my reach. I did know what I was interested in, though. And, when I was in college, it was the height of the Cold War in the 80s. And, we were living with the specter of a world-ending nuclear exchange between the Soviet Union and the United States. And that was just something that was just kind of the overhang of everyday life. And I took that pretty seriously. And I started looking around the world and I saw injustices things that I didn't agree with. And I just thought to myself, I'd like to, in some small way, be part of shaping things. So I knew I had that interest. And then when I graduated from college, I really wanted to travel and actually see this world that I had so much interest in. And at that point, I had never been to Asia. And so I got a job in Asia, in Japan, for 2 years. And then I came back and was in California where part of my family lives. And I realized when I was sitting there, I was like, I got to get a job. What am I going to do? I got to get a job. It was this, big open space. Like, how do I focus? Where do I go? And then I realized that everything I was interested in was in Washington, D.C. And so then I tried to get a job in Washington, D.C. from California. And then I had this epiphany that you don't get a job in Washington, D.C. by sitting on a beach in California writing letters. And so I packed up my car and I drove across the country and just moved to Washington. And I was not able to, I arrived in Washington. I was like, I speak French. I speak a little Japanese. I've got all this experience. I've got this great college education. I should be able to get a job on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. No. My first job was working as a temp making copies. And I was doing that to try and make enough money to actually do a serious job search. But I stuck with it. And I eventually did, after a couple of years, after working downtown, I did the revolving door in reverse. I worked downtown at a lobbying firm, and then I went to the Hill and stayed in government. But I did keep in my mind what I was interested in. And so, I mean, one, I was never one of those people who just kind of knew this is what I want to do with my life. I knew what I was interested in. And then I tried to kind of open my mind to what, might be interesting to do next. So I guess my advice would be, and this should be whether you're interested in, working in foreign policy or actually doing anything else in other areas, is one, don't get discouraged. The early steps when you're out of college can sometimes feel a little overwhelming and you're just not sure if you're going in the right direction, but just make the best decisions you can and cast about and see where there are opportunities. One thing I was really bad at was networking. And this was at a time where like the term networking was, becoming a thing. Like you need to network and you meet people and they'll help open doors. And I always felt like I was imposing on people. So, not that I knew that many people to go to and ask, but like it didn't even occur to me to go back to my college and say, who from my college is living in DC that I could maybe talk to? It didn't even occur to me to do that. So my advice, and I mentor and coach and stay in contact with a lot of my former students and also when I was in my positions in government, to people and give them advice about their career. And the one thing I will say is, like if there are people you're interested in talking to, just ask them if they're willing to, give you 10, 15 minutes to get their advice and, just be a little extroverted in that. And then follow up and realize that, okay, if you send one email and they don't reply, that doesn't mean they don't want to talk to you. It may just mean they're having a really busy day and they completely forgot. So, be persistent. If you email them 10 times and they don't reply, then maybe they don't want to talk to you. Use your judgment on
that. Moving away a little bit from this, but still super important. Since climate change is being viewed more and more as a global issue, and we can see it even more with the effects of COVID, what effect will the new administration's climate goals have on foreign policy?
Depends on who the new administration is, and I think we're inching closer, unless it's been announced while we're talking. Climate change is an issue where you really do need to be working around the world and bringing countries together to kind of renew a commitment. What was it, the day after the election that our withdrawal from the Paris Accord went into effect? We need to undo that quickly. And there's kind of a two-track, at least, bit of work that needs to be done to really and effectively tackle climate change. And one is, gathering global will and commitment. And then the second is really making progress on the technology and practices that will affect the amount of carbon that we're emitting. So there's a scientific agenda, there's a diplomatic agenda, and then there's a political leadership agenda. If you look at the dramatic weather that we're experiencing, if you look at the fires and the fact that just about every summer we cannot breathe here for weeks at a time, and you look at fires that are still going on in California. It is climate change. I went for a hike with a friend of mine whose son is a firefighter in California this morning. And he was saying that 5 million acres burned this year, and that all the firefighters are expecting that next summer it's going to be 6 million. This is climate change.
How do you think the new administration can handle the distribution of vaccines to the American public and to other countries across the globe in light of the fact that public trust in American government seems to be slipping?
You know, it's really interesting. On health issues, you need to put the scientists out front, like the people who actually have the technical expertise. I used to do work on biological threats, and then I've also worked in government and in situations where there were, potentially health-related issues. And, the thing I always realized is that you need to put the people who actually have the expertise to communicate out in front in communicating on these issues. I do not, in my hip pocket, have a vaccine distribution strategy for the US or the world, but I do know that there are people working on it. And part of it has to do with prioritization, and part of it has to do with global cooperation and thinking through what is a strategy that is going to work. I mean, we saw in this country where the response to COVID was basically turned over to the states. And it was said, okay, each state can manage it on their own. And what ended up happening were states ended up bidding against each other for protective equipment, for ventilators and things like that. So instead of there being a plan that everyone could figure out how to negotiate and work out their issues through, you pitted states against each other. A lot of valuable time, a lot of valuable expertise, and a lot of kind of strategic allocation of resources was lost from that. So you could kind of take that, we do need a global strategy. It is not going to make sense just to tell, countries you're on your own, because that will result in things that will rebound and hurt us here at home. And even if you don't care about everyone else in the world, but I'm sure you all do, it is not in our interest to just say to the world, you're on your own.
How has foreign policy been affected by some of the issues of police brutality and racial injustice that we've seen this summer in the criminal justice system and in the larger American society? And then do these larger American issues that seem to just be American issues, do they have a significant effect on foreign policy?
Yes. I would say that, the world watches what happens here in our country. And we have, we're a country that was founded on a set of ideals, not on like a national identity that's connected to, a certain ethnicity or race or anything like that. It's just, we've got these ideals that we come together around. And so the world holds us to a higher standard because that is what we say we are about, and that is what we talk to other countries about. And so I think it can be a learning experience to see how we're grappling with issues like police brutality and racial strife, and the fact that there is ongoing and systemic racism in the United States. But that does not affect our ability to engage in other countries, with other countries, to talk about, issues that they may be having as well. So, I mean, it's a complicated question, but our voice globally in defending the dignity of every person and the universal human rights that were established by the UN is deeply important around the world. And so I think that we also need to show humility in understanding that we have things that we need to work on here at home.
Then, considering your background with Pivotal Ventures, what can the general population do about these more large issues such as police brutality and racism and sexism in American society? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, the starting place is just deciding that you are going to make a difference and that you're going to use kind of the agency and power that you have. One is by learning and understanding the historical roots of racism in this country, the fact that we were, it's part of the founding of this nation because of slavery. And then looking and tracing through, how that affects our society today and where it still exists. There are very different ways to get engaged. And obviously it depends on kind of who you are and what you believe in, whether it be on the issue of racism or whether it be on gender equality or whether it be the environment or any other issue that you have passion about. One is getting informed, like learning about the issues so that you're able to really know what you think and believe about where we need to go. The second, and of course I'll say this because this is a dramatic election week, is please vote and take the time to think through the positions that candidates have. And, it was interesting. This is a bit of a diversion, but it was interesting. I was talking with a friend of mine's daughter, and she was saying, well, I don't particularly like either candidate, because, this is the kind of world I want to have. And she articulated this amazing vision for what she thought ought to be. And I said, don't ever lose that ought. Don't ever lose that vision of where you think we really should be and where we should be working toward, and keep moving toward that. But in elections, sometimes it's a binary choice, or sometimes you have three candidates. But you have to choose which candidate is going to you have in your mind, not which candidate fully embodies the odd, because you're never going to find that perfect candidate, or rarely in your political life, will you? There are different ways to get active. One is to, certainly to vote. Secondly, write letters to the paper. You could write op-eds if you're more, if that's more your speed. Contact your member of Congress. If there are demonstrations you want to take part in, you can join and go out and show your support that way. You can also find organizations that you think are doing good work in that space, whatever issue you support. And whether it be sending them $1 or volunteering for them or doing something to support. Because, sometimes people think I've got to start my own thing. And it's good because you want people to start things, but sometimes you only have a little bit of time, and there are already people out there who've given a lot of thought and doing a lot of interesting work around something. So find some way that you can support and help give lift to their efforts. But there are probably 15,000 other ways that you can get engaged too.
Thank you. This is another direct student question. In your opinion, what can we still do to better control the COVID-19 spread in America and across the globe? And are there methods working in other countries that we can adopt?
Method number one would be wearing masks. I mean, you're talking about what we can do as individuals, right? Not what the government should do?
Both.
Okay.
Yep.
An easy question now.
Of course.
Look, this virus is real. And if you look at the numbers, it grows exponentially. And we're now seeing the beginning of an exponential growth that is deeply, deeply frightening. What may have been safe last April in Bozeman is not safe right now. These numbers are getting bigger and bigger. And the fact that wearing a mask has become politicized is beyond me. I don't understand it. And you wear a mask to protect other people from you and to protect you from other people. And then just understanding at this moment in time, even though it is very hard, not to be going to large gatherings and to really trying to limit your exposure and interaction with other people. Limit it as much as possible. And, you know, it doesn't mean you don't do anything, but just because you do something doesn't mean you do everything. And if you do feel that you've been exposed, to get a test and stay home. I mean, the way to stop the spread of this virus is to stop people who have the virus from coming in contact with other people. So you can think of all the ways that you could do that. As a country, we need to be taking approach. We need more testing. And given that we are the United States with all the technology and the science that we have, the fact that we don't have better testing is inexplicable to me. And along with that testing, you need some contact tracing as well. So, I mean, there are a lot of, I'm not a doctor, and I've done some work in this area, but there are strategies that we could be putting in place that we're not deploying right now. And we're not using our scientific expertise to try to actually, I mean, and it can be done. Like you look at other countries, we've had more deaths in the United States from COVID, and we have more people infected by a magnitude that's shocking than the rest of the globe. And then you look, you know, there's some countries where they've really managed to bring the incident way, way, way down. Or, you know, you look at New Zealand, but they're an island, so they have sort of special advantages. But there's a lot more that we could be doing. But the thing that each one of you can do is just responsible behavior, and you all know what it is, right?
Thank you. Our last question, then I'll open it up to student questions. Recently, there has been a significant amount of discussion on bringing jobs back to the United States. What effect could this have on foreign policy?
It depends on how it's done. So I don't know that any country is opposed to the United States having jobs. And because it probably means more money in the pockets of Americans to buy things from other places. So I don't know that, but I guess the effect on foreign policy is what tools are you going to use to make it happen? And probably the tools that you're going to use to make it happen are trade policy and tax policy. You're going to make it really expensive for companies to manufacture and make things abroad, or you're going to set up, you know, trade barriers and things like that that also put barriers to, you know, making a product over there and bringing it here to sell. Part of, I think, what we need to be thinking through is an overall bigger picture economic strategy. There are a lot of people that are hurting in this country and have lost their jobs, and we need to figure out how to get the economy started, restarted, and going stronger. And it's going to take a lot more than just quote unquote bringing jobs back to this country. And that may or may not be the right solution, depending on what the positions are.
Are there any students who have any questions for Ambassador Anderson? If you do, you're welcome to post them in the chat now, or you can unmute yourself and ask her directly. I have one from Atticus. Do you think that the current administration's actions on current issues, such as racial conflict and climate change, have undermined the US's reputation to the world? And if so, what must a new administration do to remedy this? assuming a transfer of power?
Yes, I believe that withdrawing from the Paris Accord signaled to the rest of the world that we don't believe that climate change is a problem and that we don't want to work with other countries in addressing it. So I think reversing that is important. I think that we've seen incitement and encouragement of racism, and in this country, you know, if you look at what happened after Charlottesville, there are all sorts of examples, and in my view, that's absolutely taking us in the wrong direction.
If there's any, yeah, of course, go ahead. Oh, I think I just heard myself. Never mind. There was a little echo. Um, if there are any students with questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself now. I believe Dr. Lee has one. Dr. Lee, would you like me to read it for you, or would you like to ask? Okay. Dr. Lee asks, you have interacted with leaders from all over during your career. Is there a person that has deeply impressed you, and why?
I think I'd like to answer by singling out a category of people. And that's diplomats. And, you know, a common kind of misperception of diplomats are that they're people who kind of wear fancy clothes and go to a lot of dinners and drink a lot of wine and talk a lot. And there certainly is that element to it. But the real work of diplomacy is trying to figure out how to advance your country's interests and to do it peacefully. And I've been deeply impressed by the diplomats that I've worked with from our government. Very hardworking, very creative, very oops, sorry. I should have turned off my phone. And on the front lines, because they are representing us all around the world, and sometimes in very dangerous situations. And then also diplomats I've met from other countries through my work at the UN, and also in the work that I did on the Iran negotiations. And it doesn't mean that I've liked every diplomat I've met or respected every diplomat I've met. But I just think that the work of trying to figure out how to both advance your country's interests and also do things to make this world a better place, and do it by working with other countries, is deeply valuable work, and we need to be investing a lot more in it. We are underinvested in our diplomats and in our diplomacy, and the cost when we do that, when we underinvest in that area, the cost to our society and to the world is very high.
Peyton Weaver asked, are you going to run for president? I think many people would like to agree with this question.
I am not going to run for president, but thank you for asking that. That made my day.
I'll ask one final question. With what mindset do you recommend these college students leave your talk, considering maybe the unhopeful world we live in right now, especially for college students, it seems, where there's the end, we're not sure about the election, we're not sure about COVID. With what mindset do you think we should switch that to?
I think it's understanding that you have agency and you have power to shape the direction of your life and to shape what you are going to use your life to accomplish on this earth. And that a lot of the problems that we face in this world, there are solutions for it, and it just takes people actually getting in the ring and doing something about it. It is really easy to be cynical and to be the person who sits there and says, no, here's why that can't happen. And the one thing that I have observed and really learned from is that a lot of really good, big, ambitious ideas, you will find a lot of people who will say, nope, not possible, can't do it. But the people who actually go out and get those things done don't get deterred by that. And so, yes, this is a moment of incredible challenge. And I really feel for college students who thought they were going to college and that they were going to be able to kind of all be in the same classroom and at all the time and, be doing social things together and all of that. And you have one picture in your mind for what your college experience is like. But this is that we are going to get through this. And your job is to keep yourself safe and healthy while we're in this period of a pandemic. But then to also understand that you have agency to shape this world that you're in. And you have more power than you think you do. One of the things that always has struck me as, a student of foreign policy and also, a practitioner, is those moments when in other countries, people realize that they have the power. So, it was in Tunisia, all of a sudden, a fruit vendor one day just said, I'm done. And he protested by setting himself on fire. And people went into the street. Even in authoritarian governments, people actually do ultimately have the power to overthrow those governments. But there's somehow in these weird moments in history, these turning points when the people realize they have the power. In the United States, we do not need to go to those extreme measures to shape our government and shape the world that we're living in. You just need to participate. And it doesn't mean you're always going to win. It doesn't mean, it doesn't mean you're always going to get as far as you want to. But if you're sitting on the sidelines, you're giving up your power. You're handing it over to the people who maybe have very different views than you do.
Thank
So
you.
I say, have hope. And I say, keep yourself safe. I know it's not something that, social distancing is not something that college students are necessarily hardwired for, but please do. And this too shall pass. And it's an exciting world out there. And I really am inspired to see what your generation is going to be doing. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We are so honored and blessed that you could be here and speak to us all. And students, if you have any questions for the Honors Presents team or for Ambassador Brooke Anderson, please email honorspresents@lantana.edu. And to receive credit for today's event, if you're a freshman in Texting Critics, click on the attendance link in the chat. Thank you so much for being here this Friday evening. Thank you to Ambassador Brooke Anderson again. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Sydney, Atticus, and Ray. And thank you, Ambassador Anderson. This was phenomenal, unforgettable. Thank you so much for your beautiful words and inspiration to the students.
Great job.
Thanks for having me, and enjoy your weekend.
Yes.
She was good.